Hello, Facebook. Hello, Instagram. I am Schellie Fanfan, and you're tuning into this week's Ask Schellie segment. I am the CEO and founder of Ask Schellie Consulting, which is an emotional intelligence firm where we work with corporations and other business entities to bring them to their next level through the provision of psychoeducation. I am a licensed psychotherapist here in the state of Florida, and I have the privilege of answering questions most of the day, every day of my life. And so what I do every Tuesday at 12 o'clock is I share a question on this platform in hopes that it gives you some tools, some new information, some knowledge that you can add to your wellness toolbox, either for yourself or for a loved one. This is in no way an attempt to replace treatment, because that's what I do most of the time in my career. It's providing individual mental health counseling, also providing therapy to families and married couples as well. I co-own an agency called Harmony Mental Health and Behavioral Services with the amazing Robin Williams, where we serve between the ages of 2 to 99 and helping all of our clients overcome their emotional issues. That is what I do. So the angle that I come from every week when I'm asked these questions is a psychotherapeutic angle. Again, it's just a perspective. I'm just providing feedback, and I would love your feedback as well. So one of the things that I need you guys to share your opinions, your feedback as well, because the person who asked the question needs to hear from all of us as a community. Again, I'm providing feedback. It is not treatment. There's so much that I just don't know, right? There's so much that I don't know, so I can only provide general feedback for each question, but I do encourage people who feel that they need a little bit more guidance, a little bit more support. You're feeling stuck. You think that you are ready to make that commitment to overcome. That is when you should consider therapy. And when you do that, you give basically informed consent that you're ready to take this journey. You understand the risks, and you are ready to break through those stuck points. And so if that is you, you can feel free to reach me at info@askschellie.com. You can call our office at 407-350-5070. You can visit with me at www.askschellie.com. So the question for this week was very simple. It wasn't very intricate, because sometimes we get questions that are loaded. But today it was simple. Why do men cheat? Why do men cheat? That was the question that was asked of me. And boy, oh boy, do I need the help of my crew, my consultation team, to share your perspective. Hello there, Instagram. Hi, Shonda Fobbs. Keegan 1924. Hello, how are you? I see Bree over here on Facebook. Thank you so much for logging in. I want to hear your perspective. Keegan 1924. Why do men cheat? Let me hear what you have to say. And over here on Facebook, hello Bree. Why do you think men cheat? Let me know, and then I will provide my feedback. Thank you so much for joining in. All right. So I'm going to wait for you guys to chime in on this, and I'm going to go ahead and get started just to kind of just address some points. But before we even get started, let me say this. Men wouldn't cheat if women didn't allow it. I'm going to let that marinate. Hello, Dominique. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's Ask Schellie segment. Our topic is, why do men cheat? And so I started off with just a simple statement before we kind of go deeper into it and really kind of explore all those psychological factors. Men would not cheat if there weren't women that allowed it. Agreed or disagreed? Let me hear you. Do you agree or do you disagree? People will do what they are allowed to do, and our allowance will reinforce behaviors that may not necessarily be healthy, but they cannot happen. They're not strengthened without reinforcement. They're not strengthened without reinforcement. People do what they are allowed to do. Okay, people do what they're allowed to do. Keegan1924 says disagree. I want to hear. Then let me know what your perspective is. Jawan says disagree. Why do men cheat? So people will do what they are allowed to do. We're going to come from that from a behavioral perspective, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. So Bree here on Facebook says men cheat because they are not happy anymore and don't love you anymore. Ooh. Okay. Instagram, do you guys agree? Bree on Facebook says men cheat because they are not happy and they don't love you anymore. What do you guys think with that perspective? Let me know if you agree or disagree. So we're getting some conflicting points here. So, which is good because I want to make sure that we have this conversation. Jackie, thank you so much for tuning in. We are talking about why men cheat. And boy, oh boy, do I need my consultation team today. So for those of you who are tuning in late, I started off with the blanket statement just to get this conversation going. And I said that Keegan1924 says strong possibility for Facebook. Okay, all right. Nicole says life becomes complacent for both usually. So people are talking about why they think men cheat. Here on Instagram, Juwan says a man can still love you and cheat. I agree with that, Juwan. So I started this statement. I said that men would not cheat if there weren't women that allowed it. That our allowance strengthens that behavior. We had some people here on Instagram disagree. We have some statements coming in. The most recent one is a man can still love you and cheat. Jackie says missing something essential to his basic needs. Okay, missing something essential to his basic needs. Dominique says I don't agree. A man can still love you and still cheat. Okay, all right. So we're getting this. This is good. I really want us to explore all of these perspectives. We are talking about why men cheat. Okay, and so I want to just replace men with people, and I'm going to tell you why I prefer to do that, because I'm actually going to have a guest come on, and it's going to be an evening Ask Schellie segment to give a psychological perspective on the psychology of men, and then tie that into infidelity and cheating. And so to be fair, I just want us to talk about why people cheat. Let's make it a little bit general. Joanne says he can have everything at home and more and still cheat. Joanne says a man could have everything at home and more and still cheat. Bree says maybe because their woman cheated first, okay? So for those of you who are, hi Tiffany Bird Ferdinand, thank you so much for tuning in. We are talking about why men cheat. All right, Keegan1924 on Instagram says people can love you and cheat, but not put it out there, okay? That makes sense. I got you, Keegan1924. I know exactly what you meant. So he's saying that people can love you and cheat, but not put it out there. Jackie here on Instagram says, my same statement applies. People cheat because there is something not vocalized, something is missing. Let's talk about mirror. Okay? So we're talking about the mirror. So I want you guys to chime in on this concept, this thought, something for us to munch on. Because again, I don't promise to know all the answers, but I definitely want to give feedback for people to kind of reach their own conclusions and decide if they want more support. And that's what I'm here to do. Bree says no communication there. Communication is a big one, right? When people stop communicating. All right. So hi Anissa, thank you so much for tuning into this week's Ask Schellie segment. We're talking about cheating men. And Fuji, a funny dude, is logged in on Instagram. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk about the mirror, the relationship mirror. And so this concept basically explains or basically implies that the decisions that people make in relationships mirror their EGP. Okay? Let me say that again. The mirror, the concept of the mirror, basically explains that the decisions that people make in relationships mirror their emotional growth potential. Their emotional growth potential. This is things that in their emotional life, whether it is now, and when I say emotional growth potential, we're talking about their emotions, we're talking about their psyche, we're talking about what drives them, what motivates them. A lot of the times our emotional growth potential, when it's huge, right? Now let me say this. Growth potential is a very nice way of saying weakness, okay? So those things that we're falling short in, those areas that we need growth in, that's what EGP is, emotional growth potential. Many times that spills out into the way that we make decisions in relationships, including the decision to step out on someone that you love. And so when we are aligning ourselves with people who have emotional issues, where you can see that there's a big room for improvement, that EGP is kind of high, emotional growth potential is kind of high, then you are putting yourself in an at-risk situation, that you are putting your heart and your trust in an unsafe situation. The way that people make decisions in relationships, whether it's who they align themselves with, how they go about showing the love that they have for the other person, how they care for the other person. Remember, we talked about the difference between loving and caring, right? Love is the emotion. Caring is the action. So sometimes we have people that love us but don't necessarily care for us. Why? Caring is the process by which one person meets the mental and physical and spiritual needs of the other. That's what caring is. So you can love someone that doesn't have the capacity to care for you. And I don't know about you, but I've gotten to a point in my life where I just don't want someone to love me. He has to be able to also love and care for me. That's meeting those needs that I talked about, the physical needs, the psychological needs, the spiritual needs, right? And so those things are very important. So when we are looking at how people go about meeting the needs of other people, we can see how their emotional injury, those areas that are in need of development, how that spills over into the way that they conduct themselves in their relationship. So when we're talking about a cheating person, it's important for us as psychotherapists that, seek out to help resolve the situation, is to take a look at where the person is at emotionally. That's very, very important, because again, the way that we decide and the way that we conduct ourselves in relationships have a lot to do with our emotional growth potential. So we see the decisions that we make mirror where we are internally, where we are emotionally, okay? And so some of you may say, look, it has nothing to do with emotional injury, and it may not. That emotional growth potential, that area, that weakness that I'm talking about can be there as a result of emotional injury, but it could also be there for so many different reasons. When someone has a huge emotional growth potential quotient, when it's huge, like that weakness is pretty big, right? We don't want to say the word weakness, but when that's really big, it could be for so many different reasons. Emotional injury, it could be learned behavior, it could be society, that society says that you are a man when you can do this, it adds to your value as a man when you can manipulate and use women and whatever. It could be what you learn, it could be a way of a person overcoming their own internal insecurities, right? And trying to overcome and mask those insecurities that way. But whatever it is, it all adds to emotional growth potential. We should be seeking out to align ourselves with men or women, men and women, that have a low EGP, where they're doing pretty good emotionally. They're healthy, their decisions are healthy, their outlooks are healthy. There's some victory with, unhealthy learned behaviors, and there's some victory with societal standards. We need to align ourselves with people like that, okay? So again, our decisions in relationships often mirror our emotional growth potential. Next, let's talk about examples. How many of you on this live have had healthy examples of what love should look like? How many of you have had healthy examples of what love and commitment should look like? I'd love to hear from you. Oh boy, Jackie says a lot of that comes from what they were raised with, what they saw in their absorbent years. If love is fear-based, then barriers exist internally, and the idea of not being love-worthy grows. If you that happens, detachment becomes a safety net, even while being in a relationship. And Jackie gives a thumbs up where she has seen a healthy, what healthy love and attachment looks like. Tiffany Bird Ferdinand says, yes, she had a healthy look with her parents. Very good. Awesome. So it's important that we consider this, because sometimes I have people come in for help in their relationships, and one of the questions I ask is, can you share what your example of stable and healthy love and commitment look like? And I want you guys to just guess. Guess what generally happens after that. These are people that are coming in for relationship help. Most of the time, they have not had a healthy example of what love and commitment looks like. Now, we have to remember this. The things that we learn in those absorbent years, those first life lessons, our true culture starts in our household. And a lot of those lessons become very fixed in our brains. Sometimes we don't even know where they come from. They're just belief systems that feel like they just got deposited there. But these are ideas that were introduced into our eye gates and into our ear gates. And so they become a part of who we are. And a lot of the learned behavior and learned concepts that we have are very hard to divorce from because they're so concrete and they've been reinforced. Some of it lies in our subconscious minds as well. And so we're not so aware of it. But our awareness doesn't mean that that thing that you're not aware of is not powerful. You can go ahead and deny your emotional injury all you want. But anything that it does not have to be in your awareness to have power. You can choose to sweep things under the rug. It doesn't mean that it will not have power. Those things, most of the time, those things that we sweep under the rug become malignant emotional tumors that spread, right? So it doesn't matter that you're not aware, but they're there. And it's important for us to be able to determine what are those life lessons. What did I learn, out of the domestic violence issues my parents had? What were those lessons that are there, that are probably lying dormant, but they're still there? Right? What are those lessons that I learned when mom continued to take daddy back after cheating? What did I learn in that? Right? What did I learn so all of those lessons are there, and they create a belief system in us. So when we start talking about cheating, it's so much deeper than just the action, but also that. Where was this person's example of what stable love and commitment look like? I'm not saying that you shouldn't align yourself with someone who hadn't had that example, because there are people that have very healthy relationships. When you talk about their upbringing, they will tell you their parents were divorced. They lived in an environment, a home environment that was that frequently they had to deal with aversive, circumstances, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot engage in a healthy relationship. What it means is that there are things that they needed to overcome. And so your exposure to brokenness is not necessarily the issue, but if you haven't overcome it, that is the issue. This is why it's important for us to ask the question, how long have you been successfully single? Because it's in that place that true healing happens. And we have to be able to heal from the hurt, to heal from those lessons, to heal from that brokenness, because the only place that you can take that to is into another relationship, right? That's not the only place, but that's a primary place. That's a general place, a very common place that we displace that. So it's important to know what this person's example of steady and stable love and commitment is. The next thing that I want to talk about is self-discipline. Self-discipline. Going back to the question, why do men cheat? I kind of threw in an alternative. Why do people cheat? Let's talk about self-discipline. How do you define self-discipline? How do you define self-discipline? I'm going to tell you what my definition of self-discipline is, and I'd love to hear what yours are. So, my definition of self-discipline is this. This is our ability to say no to the things that we want to do that may not be the best for us. Our ability to say yes to the things that we do not want to do that is good for us. That is self-discipline. It's a motivation that comes from within. A lot of the times when we find people that live their lives as if their decisions do not negatively impact others, we also find that there is an inability to deny themselves of gratification. An inability to deny themselves of gratification. And so when you have that inability, when you do not have the capacity to do so, then you see something you like and you want it. You see something you like and you go after it. But not everything that we like or want are things that we should go after. Just because you have the desire or you have a sweet tooth doesn't mean that you have to get that ice cream sundae. If you're feeling a little sweet one night, doesn't mean that you have to have a Snickers bar. It just means that you have a sweet tooth. It just means that you have a desire. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it. We have to stop living life responding and reacting to the things that we want. We have to be able to apply discipline, and that requires an ability to be able to deny yourself gratification. And you know where that comes from? That comes from self-love, that you love yourself so much that you would overcome your own desires because it's not good for you. That you would be able to overcome your own desires because it's not good for you. That is a manifestation of self-love. So why are we talking about self-discipline here? Because there are a lot of things that you can pick up on before you commit yourself to a relationship. You'll be able to see that not always what is said is followed through with. That's a disciplinary issue, right? You can see when someone struggles with immediate gratification. I want it and I want it now. People who make decisions spontaneously and don't necessarily forecast the consequences of their actions, these are people that have a high risk of stepping out because they are not it doesn't come natural for them to be able to assess, to be able to analyze the pros and cons of every possible outcome. If I do this, this may happen. If I do this, this may happen. If I do this, this may happen. You can see that in other areas, right? You're able to kind of see that in other areas of life just by interacting with that person. And so when we are at the place where we are in conversation, right? We're in conversation. You've already been successfully single for your year. You have established a powerful and intimate relationship with your higher power. That emotional injury, you've learned mechanisms to overcome them, and you're exposing yourself to relationships and getting to know people. While you're having these conversations, we should be assessing those things. What's his example of stable love and commitment? Where did that example come from? And if he didn't have the example, what work has he done to overcome that injury, right? Look at how he deals with with denying himself gratification. If it's someone that as soon as he's hungry, this is what he needs. If he wants money, he needs to have it now. Like, you can start to tell when people struggle with the capacity to deny themselves of gratification. We got to take a look at that. What are some other examples of someone that may struggle with that? Right? And so when you start to see that, those should be red flags, because we need people, men and women, that despite how they feel, they will make the decision that is the healthiest for themselves and the people that they love. That because spontaneous people will be the first one to step out. We had an argument, so boom. We had an argument, so you just stop thinking. You barely think anyway, right? But because things are unfavorable, then I'm going to seek this gratification. And so these are all, it's important for us to be able to kind of take a look at that and see how people work with delaying and denying themselves gratification when it's the best for them. Jackie says, when you say successfully single, do you mean not dating as well or not being in a commitment? Being successfully single means that you are not dating. And there are studies that show that we should be successfully single for at least a year after a really hurtful relationship to give yours at least. That means it could be more. To be able to recover from relationships that may have caused injury. So yeah, that means no dating apps. That means no late night phone calls because you need to get scratched, right? None of that. No relations, no sexual relations, single. You're not spending time with anyone, single. And so that is a part of relationship development. It really is. And I know that I've talked about this before, but because we're on the topic, we have to think about things in developmental stages. And I use this example to kind of help people understand the developmental stages for relationships as well. So I had a client who was diagnosed with autism like at the age of 6, which is not typical in this day and age. We're able to find that much sooner. And so when I asked his mother, like, no one ever said to you, like, you know, there's something wrong, or you really should consider this, or I think you should see a neurologist. I didn't understand how in all those years, all they saw was a speech impediment, but did not see the signs of autism. And one of the things that she said is, well, one time there was one doctor in all of the years of my son's life that said something about a possible developmental disability. So I said, okay, well, what is that? And she said one day she went to the doctor. She had all these videos of her son getting up, sprinting around the house, and falling flat on his face. They all thought it was funny. It was very early on. He was only like about 8 or 9 months. Didn't walk, didn't stand, didn't sit, didn't have his balance yet, but he would get up and he would take off running and he'd just fall down. They thought it was the most funniest thing. She shares these videos with the pediatrician, and the pediatrician is not smiling. And the pediatrician says, I think that your child has a developmental disability. And she said, the reason why I think that is because he skipped over the foundational stages in his development. That he has not mastered, he's not achieved sitting, he's not achieved standing, he hasn't even walked yet, and now he's running. And so we have to understand that a lot of the times the decisions that we make in relationships are developmentally delayed. There are signs of a developmental disability in your relationship. Because part of those fundamental stages in achieving healthy relationships is being successfully single. Yes, let's breathe on that. Okay, so we talked about self-discipline and making sure that we are aligning ourselves with people that do not have an issue with immediate gratification. People that have the capacity to deny themselves or delay their gratification. That's important. That's self-discipline. You want a man or a woman whose yes means yes, whose no is no, that you are able to engage in effective decision making, that you're not just jumping into things, but you are taking your time, right? All of this requires discipline. The next thing, let's talk about expectations and non-negotiables. Expectations and non-negotiables. So earlier, I made a comment that everyone on Instagram disagreed with, and that was men wouldn't cheat if there were women that didn't allow it. If all women didn't allow it, men would not cheat, right? And I got a disagreed on Instagram, and that's fine. That's fine. I appreciate that. Let's talk about expectations and non-negotiables. I don't know how many times I have heard people say that this is a non-negotiable for me. Cheating is a non-negotiable. Hitting is a non-negotiable. Calling me out of my name is a non-negotiable, right? Non-negotiable means that we're not even conversing about it. Our relationship is over because this is a non-negotiable. That's it. And so when I am working with couples, one of the first things I will ask is, what are your non-negotiables? What are your non-negotiables? And they'll say, well, one of my non-negotiables is cheating. But if this was truly a non-negotiable to you, we would not be in this counseling office discussing his cheating. You'd be out. So we have to be true to ourselves about truly what is non-negotiable and not declare non-negotiables that we are not ready to enforce. Because if you're not going to enforce it for yourself, don't expect anybody else to. I need to hear from Facebook and I need to hear from Instagram. It's just that simple. If you cannot protect your own non-negotiables, don't expect anybody else to. So we have to stop as women and men declaring these non-negotiables that you are not ready to protect. It's as simple as that. Non-negotiables are healthy. Do you know why they're healthy? Because non-negotiables are, oh my God, here comes the B word, boundaries. And relationships without boundaries are unhealthy. Relationships without non-negotiables are unhealthy. We need non-negotiables. We need boundaries. Yes? Some people's non-negotiables align with the word. And so if it's in the word, then and that's fine too. But whatever it is, understand that healthy relationships require boundaries which produce non-negotiables. Okay? And so when we're talking about why do men cheat or why do women cheat or we have to understand how behavior works, right? When there is an allowance, there is a reinforcement that happens. And we're going to talk about reinforcement in just a second. So I want to put a pin in how our allowance becomes a reinforcement that causes the behavior to strengthen. Before we go to that, the power of reward, I want to talk about expectations. A lot of the times, we do not understand how expectations work. Expectations have to be something that's communicated. Expectations cannot be assumed. I'm going to say it again. Expectations cannot be assumed. They have to be communicated. And so first and foremost, we have to make sure before we are ready to talk about our expectations with a loved one, we have to make sure that the expectations are realistic. We do. We have to be able to assess whether the expectation is realistic. So you're going to ask this person to be in a committed relationship, no dating other people. We're not having sex outside of this relationship, but you've only been together for a few months, or you guys are not living in the same state, or whatever it is, whatever you, and actually that I wouldn't say that's not realistic. You can still have a long distance relationship, and two people who have self-discipline can make that work, right? But we have to make sure that our expectations are realistic. We have to make sure that our expectations have been communicated to the other person. And then we have to make sure that the other party actually accepted the responsibility to meet that expectation. And so a lot of the times women will come in and say, I made it clear to him that I would not accept this. I made it very clear to him that I wasn't, and then I have to take it back. I say, okay, so do you think that it's realistic for him to not cheat? Do you believe that's, yes, I believe that's realistic. Okay, good. So we check that off of the realistic list. Let's move on to the next. So you communicated this to him, correct? Yes. And so I like to assess the communication style. Did you do it in the heat of an argument? Because that is not effective communication, right? I'm talking about intentional conversation, not in the heat of the moment, where you express your expectation to the other party, right? And then we get some issues there because it's like, okay, so because there was not effective communication, our therapy process starts there. But when someone says, no, we had a conversation, we sat down, we had this communication, and then I asked the third thing, did the other party accept the responsibility to meet that expectation? And then she'll be like, well, most of the time, like, I'm assuming, yeah, okay. What did he say? What did he say to you when you said, I expect that we are not having sex outside of this relationship. This is how it's going to be. We're exclusive. This is my expectation. I ask, what is it that he said to you? What is it that she said to you? When you said that you expect him to be the breadwinner and you want to stay home and not work and you commute, what was that response? Because we have to make sure that people are explicitly, right? They are verbalizing their commitment to meet an expectation that we have communicated. You cannot just assume that after you have this great conversation, you walked away without a what? A commitment. Tell me what it is I said. Tell me what it is I'm asking you. What did I say was my expectation? So you know they heard what you said, that they understood what it is you're expecting, and they accepted the responsibility to meet that expectation. Because when that is broken, and you know for sure, you assess the reality behind your expectation. You communicated it. He accepted that. You guys entered into this commitment as a result of that. Then you have to ask yourself, are you willing to deal with this? A broken commitment after having intentional conversation about expectations. A lot of times when people are coming in with relationship issues, especially surrounding infidelity, and there's other things. There's those intimate needs that we talked about not being met, right? We talked about the process of loving and caring. But that's important, just assessing and exploring expectations and exploring non-negotiables. That's very important. We're going to talk about positive rewards. We're going to talk about rewards and how that strengthens behavior in just a little bit. And then we're going to talk about needs, and then we're going to close. So, this is how behavior works. Consequence. Things that happen after a behavior is manifested determine whether that behavior is strengthened or weakened. Whatever happens after a behavior is displayed, right, determines whether that behavior will be strengthened or weakened. That's important. I said earlier that men wouldn't cheat if there were women that didn't allow it. That means that there would not be an acceptance possible because women would no longer, men or women would be able to perceive loss, hopefully as something aversive enough that they would not engage. Or they would engage and actually experience the loss, and then we would have some type of modification happen. Why? Because what happens after a behavior will determine whether the behavior is strengthened or weakened. This is why it's important for us to understand how this works. When you allow it, your allowance has just become a reinforcer. So the chances of the behavior happening again after you have forgiven is higher, because that's just human behavior. What happens after a behavior will determine whether that behavior is strengthened or weakened. So our allowance becomes reward. It becomes reinforcement. We have to teach people how to treat us. We have to teach people how to treat us. And that is assuring that you are providing consequences when actions are hurtful, when actions are manipulative, when actions are dishonest, right? And so we have to remember what happens after a behavior will determine whether that behavior is strengthened or weakened. And so when a man or a woman has stepped out of that relationship and they've had or are having amazing flesh-based experiences, right? And then they're coming home and they are engaging in more of their real life day-to-day. That sometimes cheating has to do with escape. Like I said, there are certain concepts that we will be addressing when my guest comes on to talk about why men cheat. We're going to talk about escape avoidance. We're going to talk about attention. We're going to talk about those things. I'll give you a quick little bit before we close, and then we're going to go into it a little bit more. But what happens after that will determine whether that behavior is strengthened or weakened. So we're looking at, let's look at a sexual experience, right? So what happens after a sexual experience? There's sexual gratification that comes out of that. There's sexual gratification. So as a result of that sexual gratification, we know that the chances of that happening again become higher. This is behavior 101. There's behavior 101, right? Because we just talked about what happens after behavior will determine whether it's strengthened or weakened. So you have an amazing sexual experience. What are the chances of it happening again? They're high, because that outcome is positive. So then in order to overpower the strength of that sexual gratification, the aversion of whatever consequence would have to overpower the sexual gratification. So when you're just kind of mouthing off and you're being naggy and looking through the phone, but you're really not taking action. You're naggy and looking through the phone and bickering or whatever, but in a day or two it goes away, or you make these claims, I'm not the one, and all these other things that your behavior is not aligning with. When we take that outcome and the outcome of the sexual gratification wins. So that will continue to cause the behavior to happen. And so we have to look at outcomes. What are the outcomes that are opposing the reward of this sexual gratification? This is a very behavioral perspective, but when we're looking at addressing these issues, we have to look at it this way and show the other party how they have just become a part of the contingency. I wouldn't say the problem. Don't start blaming yourself for cheating, women. Don't start blaming yourself for cheating, men, right? But it's important for you to see how behavior works and how there can be a contribution by you based on how you respond or how you react to the violation. So this is when you have to make a difficult decision and honor yourself more than the comfort. To honor yourself more than the comfort, okay? And I know that with married couples, it may be we're talking about, it's more difficult to walk away, right? There's a lot more involved when it's infidelity with a married couple. But I will say this, go to the Word. And the Word makes it clear what you are allowed to do if you choose not to offer grace if it happens in your marriage. So here we go. So we talked about relationships and the decisions that we make in relationships tend to mirror our emotional growth potential. We talked about stable examples. being able to really see how the people that we love or the people that we are about to align ourselves with, what were their stable examples, and when they did not have stable examples, what was intentionally done to overcome that? What work was done to get healing in those areas? We talked about self-discipline, our ability or our focus on really watching the person that we are considering marrying, watching and kind of analyzing the person that we're thinking about being with on how they handle immediate gratification, how they are able to say no to the things that they want to do that are not healthy, their ability to say yes to the things that they don't want to do, that they need to do, right? That is self-discipline, and being able to really take a look at that. I know sometimes spontaneity is sexy, but spontaneity can lead to many different destructive things and undesired outcomes in relationships. And so we have to be able to look at those things. We talked about non-negotiables and boundaries being healthy, making sure that you're talking about expectations with the person that you love, that you are assessing how realistic your expectations are before you even sit with the other person. If they're not realistic, don't bother the other person. Just get help for yourself. Get treatment for yourself for your unrealistic expectations, okay? And leave the other party alone, okay? Right? But if you do feel that they're realistic, right, then great, sit down and have that communication. But if you're going to be asking for things that are not realistic, like I need you to tell me I'm beautiful every day, well, honey child, you need to take your communication to a licensed professional that can help you with filling your own bucket. Filling your own bucket. Because sometimes validation is for parking only. I heard that at a conference and I love it. Okay, we talked about rewards. We talked about how behavior, you can determine whether a behavior will be strengthened or weakened by looking at the power of what happened right after. So these consequences that we are exposing our loved ones to have to be able to overpower the sexual gratification, because we know that that is a rewarding thing. That's a rewarding consequence. It's positive reinforcement. It's going to cause the behavior to possibly happen again, right? And so what you are doing and how you are responding is so key, because when you start saying and declaring things that you're going to do, you're going to leave, you're going to get divorced, you're going to do all these things that you haven't done, you have just created another condition. You just have created another equation. And the other equation is, you have just taught me to not listen to you. So now you have lost all power and all authority, because every time he cheats, you are declaring about what you're going to do and never do it. And so now your threats have no power, and the sexual gratification is still trumping your threats. That's why he continues to do it, because we're looking at the strength of the outcome. The strength of the outcome, those consequences. Who is winning? What outcome, what consequence is winning in power? We haven't talked about this yet, so let's talk about some general, really, really quick things when it comes to needs. Someone mentioned earlier, people cheat when their needs are not being met. I think that needs not being met does not necessarily should give allowance, right? It should not give allowance, because people still have the power to choose. People still have the power to decide. The fact that you're not getting your needs met is not an open door for you to break a commitment that you have with someone, period. If you're so unhappy, I'm talking to people who are not necessarily married, because that's a whole different discussion when you are. But when you are not having your needs met, then leave. But don't accept someone stepping out on you, right? Don't accept someone stepping out on you. Just leave. Just leave, right? Because that acceptance is doing what? It's responding, it's rewarding the behavior. And so, again, I want to make sure that you understand that when someone is saying that their needs are not being met, it's not necessarily allowance for them to cheat. So women who have been cheated on and men who have been cheated on, stop beating yourself up. We have to hold people accountable. I just want to make sure I say that before I start going into unmet needs, because that is, and that's a real deal Holyfield thing, right? That I'm in this relationship, my physical needs are not being met, and let me say this, because when we're talking about sex and intimacy, I always talk about how it's so much more than fire zone, right? So if you're having intimacy issues and physically you're not finding gratification there, a lot of times it's something completely different than just that, right? And that's why it's important to then get a therapist, go into therapy so we can work out the those kinks. But you're in a situation, your physical needs are not being met, your spiritual needs are not being met, your emotional needs are not being met. And so this is important because whoever made that comment earlier is correct. It does happen as a result of unmet needs. And making sure that we're able to kind of explore that in a healthy way, in a safe environment, those unmet needs, and talk about the blockages and why the person is not meeting those needs. Does the person have the capacity to meet those needs? Does the person have a willingness to meet those needs? Have those needs even been communicated? I don't know how many women have never really expressed their physical needs to the people that they love, and so really taking a look at that and exploring them and empowering people and giving them the tools that they need to be able to meet the needs of someone that they love is all a part of the therapeutic process. So yes, I just want to address the comment that someone meant about unmet needs. That very much plays a part in this. At the end of the day, I always want to push alignment. Alignment is this, that the decisions that you make in life, the way that you conduct yourself, that it is aligned with the desired outcomes you have for your life. What keeps me in business are people that declare desired outcomes, but constantly make decisions that oppose it. That is what keeps me in business as a psychotherapist. People who declare certain desired outcomes, but do not have the self-discipline, right? The awareness or the willpower to make decisions that are in line with those desired outcomes and wonder why life is serving you lemons. No, life is not serving you lemons. Your decisions are. And so we have to make sure that when we get lost in life, that we are able to consult what those desired outcomes are. You want to be in a happy and healthy relationship, but you are jumping and having sex the second week that you guys have met. Well, you just skipped some fundamental stages in two people building their relationship, and you wonder why your marriage lasted 2 years. Well, you guys have just jumped over we just talked about developmental stages and the importance of making sure that you're working through those stages. What's the rush? You want a lifetime of happiness. You want to be able to be looking into the eyes of the person that you love when you take your last breath or he takes his last breath. Well, guess what? There's discipline that's required. There's a commitment to a certain type of decision making to attract that outcome. We have to start making decisions in line with outcomes that we want. If you don't want to be in a broken relationship, why do you keep accepting his or her cheating? Why? That's not the outcome that you want. So we have to start in any and every area of our life. In our intellectual life, physical, financial, social, spiritual, I can go on and on. It's making sure that the decisions that you're making are in line with the outcomes that you want for your life. Those desired outcomes, yes? And so when it comes down to it, why do men cheat? We wouldn't even have this conversation. We wouldn't have to have this conversation if you didn't allow it. It wouldn't matter why they cheated. You out. It doesn't matter. Because you're out. We can try to understand it, and we're going to go into it, I'm going to have someone come on with me, and we're going to talk about the psychology behind that a little bit deeper. I think it'll be fair because my guest is a male. And so I don't want to give a one-sided view, right? My view that's full of estrogen. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more. We're going to talk about needs. We're going to talk about being able to love someone and still cheat on them. All of the concepts that we kind of touched on earlier. Thank you so much for your commentary because it's going to definitely help us to guide that discussion. But again, you know, when I come on here, I try to give general information, try to give perspectives, try to give some feedback, some facts, some psychological facts, some this is how things work in the behavioral world, just for us to be able to see things from a different perspective. I sure hope that it's something that you can deposit into your wellness toolbox or to deposit into the wellness toolbox of someone that you love. But this is why we are here. To learn and become the best versions of ourselves. And so I thank you so much for your support of Ask Schellie Consulting. Look out for part 2 with my guest as we talk a little bit more about why men cheat. We'll also be talking about why women cheat. Look out for that advertisement. We're still trying to work out our schedules to make sure that we can do it together. It will be an evening Ask Schellie segment where we go a little bit further into why men and why women cheat. And so look out for that. I'd love for you guys to be a part of that. That will also be live here on Facebook and Instagram as well. I will be posting the date and the time for that. Make sure you are there. I appreciate your share, so I would love for you to share this live on today. You can reach me at info@askschellie.com if you want to talk about this a little bit more. It's definitely something that people often have to deal with, unfortunately. Again, you can reach out at info@askschellie.com. If I said anything that maybe didn't make sense, something that you want me to repeat, again, info@askschellie.com. You can call 407-350-5070. I am here for you. I am your emotional intelligence expert. Thank you for tuning in to this week's Ask Schellie segment.